not yet broken, names unspoken, bonds unshaken.
Sensible Hysteria. Book 1. Caper la Verte. 6th Intermission. The Sins of the Blood.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear it? The sound of a city unraveling, thread by delicate thread. The pieces have fallen, the dice have been cast, and the house is losing control. Ah, but who are we kidding? The house always wins, doesn't it? Or so we were taught. Let's take a breath, shall we? A moment to steady ourselves before we wade deeper into the filth and fire of it all. Gorga is dead. Ang Blackthorn now owns the broken wing, though I wonder if he knows just how many debts and ghosts that deed carries with it. And Brand Nightshade, oh, poor Brand. He finally caught up to Damas, didn't he? He tracked that silver-tongued bastard down to the docks, ready to carve his anger into the man's bones. But it seems fate had other plans, because something else, someone else, got there first. And now Damas Barlays is dead. Not just dead, no. He did not pass quietly into the night, as a man of his particular nature might have hoped. He did not slip away under a false name, did not swindle fate itself into a more comfortable ending. No, Damas burned. Oh, how poetic that is. The man who thought himself untouchable, the man who built an empire out of whispers and half-truths, reduced to nothing but ash and screaming. But the question, dear listeners, is why? Who was that fiery figure that emerged from the depths of the city's forgotten past? Who was the young man of embers and rage, whose fury did not just end Damas's life, but devoured it, consumed it from the inside out? Ah, but we are missing something, aren't we? Something crucial, something buried beneath the weight of time and betrayal. So let us go backward, shall we? Let us peel back the layers of the past, dig our fingers into the festering wound that is the Barlays' legacy, and see what rots beneath. Let us speak now of Eagswil Barlays, the black sheep, the one who strayed, the one who paid the price. And let us tell the tale of how she died, and how, years later, her dear brother Damas, ah yes, Damas, always the schemer, always the coward, decided to do something unthinkable. He decided to grow a conscience, and when he learned that her child lived, oh, that changed everything. So sit close, dear listeners, for this is not just a tale of death. It is a tale of consequence. It is a tale of the past catching up to the present. And believe me when I say, it always does. Ladies and gentlemen, we rewind the clock. We return to a different time, a different Damas, one who had yet to abandon his name, yet to taste the bitterness of regret. Let us follow the smoke trails of history, back to the night the illusion shattered, and he saw his family for what they truly were. Damas had always known the Barlays' name carried weight. A weight built on power, whispers, and carefully controlled lineage. A name that ensured influence, ensured wealth, ensured survival. But what he had never considered, what he had never dared to look too closely at, was the cost. Then came the night. The cost was laid bare. His sister Eagswil was gone, hung from a rope. The official story was suicide. He had believed it. For years, he had believed it. Because it was easier. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Until he heard the whispers. The way his sisters spoke of her, not with grief, but with amusement. The way the servants never mentioned her name unless forced. The way his mother, Sidal Barlays herself, never once spoke of her again. And then, the truth, the real reason Eagswil was dead. It was a mistake, they said. She knew the rules. She should have expected it. Damas had stood in the grand halls of his family's estate, surrounded by centuries of history, by portraits of their noble bloodline, by people who all bore his name, and realized he didn't recognize a single one of them. So he did what any sane man would do when confronted with the abyss. He got drunk. He let the wine drown the rage, let the perfume of gold and silk suffocate the betrayal, until another whisper came, until someone mentioned the boy.
What boy?
Damas had asked. No one had answered, because it didn't matter. Not to them. The child was not a Barley's. His blood was tainted, a thing best left forgotten. Damas had stared at them, at these people who shared his blood, who smiled so easily, who drank and laughed and lived without a second thought, and something inside him curdled. That night he broke into the family archives. He found the records they had buried. He found the truth. The boy had been taken, not killed, not buried, taken. The next morning, he packed his bags. He had stood before his mother, the grand lady Cedal Barlays, the woman who had shaped the family's iron rule for decades. And he had told her he was leaving. She had not tried to stop him. She had simply poured herself another glass of wine, watched him with those cold, calculating eyes, and said,
If you leave for good.
I have no intention of coming back.
Then remember this, my son.
She had leaned in, voice low, velvet smooth, weighted with something ancient and terrible.
Our blood is a privilege. If you ever lay with something unworthy, you will suffer the same fate as your sister.
And then she had smiled, and Damas Barlays walked away. For the first time in his life, he was free. And yet, the chains were still there. He just couldn't see them yet. Damas had spent years looking, years trading favors, making deals, building a network of people who would owe him, who could provide information. It wasn't easy. The Barlays family had ensured the boy's existence had been erased, but Damas was patient, and Damas did not forget. Every lead took him deeper into the underbelly of Olduvai, deeper into the places where no nobleman dared to tread. He paid scholars for forgotten records. He bribed prison officials for names. He made pacts with devils and worse, trading secrets like currency. And then, after 18 years, he finally found him. And it was so much worse than he had ever imagined. The maximum security prison beneath the Tower of Law was not just built for criminals. It was built for secrets. It was built for monsters. And the boy, his nephew, was one of them. A prisoner from birth, a subject, an experiment. For 18 years, the boy had been shaped, molded, broken, reforged, not into a man, but into something designed for a single purpose, a vessel. They called it Project Cora, an artificial god, something that would be born, not ascended. The Barlays family knew. They had known all along, and they had not cared, because the boy was never meant to be family. He was just another pawn, another calculated sacrifice. Damas had stared at the files, at the cold, clinical notes on a child who had been given no chance to be anything but a tool. And for the first time in his life, Damas Barlays had no words. Only one thought remained. I have to get him out. And so the master manipulator, the silver-tongued con man, the coward who always chose self-preservation over honor, made a choice. For the first time, he was going to do something right, even if it killed him. Of course, he couldn't do it alone. A job like this, breaking into the most secure facility in the empire, releasing something the gods themselves might fear, that required a crew. And so he set about finding them, one by one. an ex-gangster with a quick temper and fists like iron, a smiling duelist with fire in his veins and death at his back, a shapeshifter with more names than most men had lies, 3 men who had no reason to trust him. And yet, somehow they had agreed, not out of loyalty, not out of friendship, but because they had their own reasons, because Koga needed money, because Brand wanted the thrill, because Aang had nothing left to lose, and just like that, the wheels were set in motion. The first domino fell. And fate, dear listeners, has never been kind to men like Damas. Because now we return to the present, and Damas Barlays is dead. Burned from the inside out by the very thing he tried to set free. So I ask you, dear listeners, was it justice, or was it simply the price that was always meant to be paid?
Chapter 20. The Emerald Hell.
Koga was dying, and he knew it. The pain was impossible to ignore, a relentless, suffocating force that pressed into every fiber of his being. His body was broken. His limbs trembled, the muscles frayed beyond repair. His skin was slick with blood and sweat, every breath a ragged, shallow gasp, dragging air into lungs that no longer wanted to work. The floor beneath him was cold, slick with the remnants of the fight, his own blood pooling around him, seeping into his clothes, sticking to his skin like a second death. He tried to move. Nothing. His arms wouldn't respond. His legs felt like lead. He was trapped inside himself, in the pain, in the creeping, inescapable feeling that his time was over. A cold dread settled into his bones. So this was it. This was what it felt like to die. No last words, no heroic send-off. Just darkness pressing in, just lungs refusing to expand, just the slow, agonizing suffocation of a man who had lived too fast, cut too many throats, and now, the knife had finally found his. He coughed, the taste of iron flooding his mouth. It burned. Everything burned. His vision blurred, the edges of the world curling into shadows, his body betraying him, slowing, failing, shutting down. His heart stuttered, his pulse weak. There was no stopping it, no escaping it. Koga was leaving the world, and the only thing left was the question. What comes next? Would the gods welcome him? Would they even bother? Would he be judged? Would he be cast into nothing? Would he wake up in some dark afterlife, drowning in every sin he had ever committed? A tear, warm, bitter, unintentional, slid down his temple. Not out of regret, not out of fear, but out of anger. This isn't how I was supposed to go. His breathing slowed, his body stilled, and then Koga died. Koga's first breath in death was not the breath of a man reborn. It was the breath of a man forgotten. The air was thick, heavy, tainted with something stagnant, something old, something that had been waiting for him before he had even arrived. The floor beneath him was polished emerald, smooth and unblemished, stretching in every direction, yet offering no reflection. The mist slithered across its surface, dense, shifting like it was alive, coiling around his ankles like unseen hands. And above him, nothing. A blackness so absolute, so vast and endless, that it did not feel like a sky at all. It was as if the world had been severed from existence, leaving only this hollow, impossible place. Koga turned, his boots hitting against the green floor in this abyss. He took one step, then another, then he was running. Not out of fear, not yet, but out of instinct. Because this wasn't right. Because this wasn't how death was supposed to be. Because there had to be something beyond this place. He sprinted forward, pushing himself harder, faster, longer, But the world did not change. The fog did not thin. The horizon never appeared. There was no edge, no landmark, no indication that he had moved at all. And then, something worse. He stopped. Not because he was tired, but because there was no sound. His footsteps, his breath, the rustling of his clothes. Gone, as if the world itself had erased him. His heart pounded in his chest. He clapped his hands together. Nothing. He tried to speak. Silence. No echo, no wind, no existence. Like he was not meant to be here. Like he was not meant to be anywhere. And that was when the true terror set in. Koga staggered back, his breath hitching. Only, he realized, he could not hear himself breathing. He opened his mouth to scream, but the silence swallowed it. This was not hell. This was not some punishment from the gods. This was nothing, a void so complete, so absolute, that it did not need pain or fire to be cruel. It only needed to be empty. And then he looked down, expecting to see his reflection, but instead, he saw them. At first, it was just shadows, a shifting black smear stretching across the emerald floor like an ink blot spilled on glass. Then, it moved, not like a reflection, not like something that mimicked his movements. It writhed. Koga's pulse staggered, a deep-rooted primal dread creeping up his spine. Something was wrong. He took a step back, expecting his shadow to follow. It didn't. Instead, the smear twisted, and the shapes within it began to take form. Faces, hundreds of them. Mouths locked in silent screams, their expressions frozen in perpetual agony. Some contorted, as if they had been trapped mid-howl, their jaws stretching far beyond human limits, their eyes bulging from sockets too wide, too raw, too filled with unrelenting horror. They reached for him, not with hands, but with their very faces, their features melting, shifting, folding over each other like liquid skin, tumbling toward him like the crushing weight of all his sins given shape. Then, he recognized them. Koga's breath hitched, his lungs seizing, because these weren't just any faces. They were his. They were the people he had killed, the men he had gutted in the streets, the gang leaders he had betrayed, the innocents who had gotten caught in the crossfire of his choices. A merchant's son, no older than 15, his throat slit because he had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A rival thug who had once pleaded for his life, promised to disappear, promised to never cross him again. A woman with hollow, sunken eyes, her lips trembling, her body covered in cuts he hadn't given her. But they had been because of him. A child. Too young. Too familiar. His stomach dropped. Because they weren't just people he had killed. They were the people he had gotten killed. Their bodies dissolved, reformed, collapsed into each other, each one trying to reach him, trying to drag him into their suffering. Koga staggered back, his heart racing, his hands shaking. And then the faces changed again. They twisted. And he saw her. His breath stopped. His mind snapped, broke, shattered at the sight before him. Because she was not supposed to be here. She was never supposed to be here. And yet, there she was. Her face ghostly pale, her lips parted in a silent cry, her eyes filled with a pain he had never seen before, because he had never looked. The love he had once held in his arms, the woman he had once whispered promises to, the one he had walked away from, the one whose fate he had sealed the moment he chose power over her. His hands trembled, his body convulsing with a cold terror that rooted itself in the marrow of his bones.
No.
His voice was a whisper that didn't exist. She reached for him, or was she falling? The faces beneath her pulled her down, devoured her, twisted her into the endless sea of agony, drowning her beneath the weight of every other lost soul he had abandoned. Her face vanished, only for another to take its place. And another, and another. Koga tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. No walls, no escape. Just the endless, shifting sea of the damned. And it was all his fault. The realization hit him harder than any wound, any blade, any bullet. He had always thought that when he died, he'd get to face the gods. He'd get to spit in their faces, to laugh at their judgment. But there were no gods here. There was nothing. Just this. Just them. His sins, his ghosts, his victims, waiting for him, forever. His mind broke. He screamed, but no sound came. And then, a voice, a whisper slipping through the cracks of reality.
Do you like it, mistress?
Koga froze. The void flickered. The green abyss trembled, like a mirage caught between realities.
We found this magnificent piece in the second core of all places.
The air shifted. Koga felt something cold, too real, too tangible, press against his throat.
It seems you will be the first to wear it.
The faces vanished. The horror collapsed into itself, and suddenly, everything changed. The void shattered. Koga gasped, stumbling forward. But there was no more endless green abyss, no more shifting, screaming faces clawing at him from beneath the surface. No more silence, no more nothingness. Instead, there was warmth. The soft golden light of a summer afternoon, the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass filling his lungs. The screams were gone, replaced by the chirping of birds, the soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. The sun kissed his skin. The sky above was a brilliant shade of blue, streaked with delicate, wispy white clouds. And when he looked down, his hands were not his own, slender, perfect. His breath hitched. He sat, not on the endless void, not on the cold green floor of suffering, but on a cushioned chaise of embroidered silk, nestled beneath the shade of a lavish garden pavilion. Around him, people moved gracefully, carefully. Dressed in fine silks and delicate jewelry, their heads slightly bowed, their movements deliberate, practiced. Servants. He blinked, mind struggling to comprehend the shift, the sheer absurdity of it all. The air was thick with luxury, the scent of rare perfumes and polished silver, the kind of wealth that had been passed down through generations. A tray was set beside him, a crystal goblet filled with deep red wine, a plate of sliced fruits arranged in delicate patterns, pastries dusted with sugar and gold leaf. And then he felt it. The weight around his neck, a delicate chain, a familiar, unmistakable shape resting against his collarbone. The emerald necklace. His hand reached up before he even thought about it, fingers grazing the gem, cool against his new, flawless skin. Koga inhaled sharply. The fingers were not his. The breath was not his. The body was not his. A mirror sat before him, mounted between the columns of the pavilion. The reflection was not him. It was a young woman, no older than 19. Eyes of deep jade green, hair like raven silk, pinned with golden combs. Lips painted a deep crimson, a noble woman's face untouched by time, hardship, or suffering. The body of wealth, of privilege, of status beyond his wildest imagination. And slowly, beneath the layers of confusion, beneath the shock and the weight of what had just happened, A smile curled onto her lips. Koga exhaled and laughed. Softly, then louder, because after all that horror, after all that suffering, after dying, after falling into that suffocating abyss, after being damned, tormented, broken, he was here, alive, rich. He leaned back into the chaise, taking in the wealth, the splendor, the sheer absurdity of his own resurrection. And he thought, as amusement curled like silk through his mind,
What a wonderful turn of events.
Chapter 21. A not-so-fair deal.
the first thing Brand felt was pain. A dull, aching throb settled in his ribs, and his wrists burned where the rough rope bit into his skin. His head felt heavy, like he'd spent the night drinking absinthe straight from the bottle. Except, judging by the absolute wrongness of the air, he had not woken up in a brothel, a gambling den, or even a back alley. He was somewhere bad. The second thing he noticed was darkness, thick and absolute, save for the weak flickering of a single swaying light overhead. It buzzed softly, casting long, shifting shadows that danced across the cold concrete floor. The third thing was the bag over his head, rough fabric stinking of sweat and old dust. Then, movement. Someone was there. The bag was ripped away and Brand squinted, his vision struggling to adjust to the dim artificial glow. His surroundings came into focus slowly, the bare concrete walls, the rusted metal table before him, the chair he was tied to, its wooden legs uneven and splintering beneath him. And then he saw the face. His stomach dropped. Red eyes. A face he knew. A face he feared. The man standing before him was tall, unnaturally still, his gray skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His suit, black as death, was immaculate, save for the faintest trace of dried blood at the cuff. His hair, dark and slicked back, only accentuated the unnatural glow of his piercing red eyes, which bored into Brand with a gaze that was too calm, too steady, too patient. This wasn't just a man. This was something else entirely. Still, Brand did what Brand did best. He grinned through the fear.
Well,
He croaked, voice hoarse.
if you wanted me tied up and blindfolded, you could have just asked. Bit of a kink, is it?
Silence. The red-eyed man didn't blink, didn't react. Brand swallowed. Oh, this was going to suck. Then, finally, the man spoke. His voice was low, measured, and laced with something far worse than rage.
Who hired you?
The words hung in the air like a blade above his throat. Brand shifted in his bindings, testing them. Tight. No wiggle room. He exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to smile.
Bit forward, aren't we? Normally we do drinks first.
The red-eyed man didn't move, didn't blink.
What was done to Harriet Barley?
That question hit harder than the first. Brand's smirk faltered just a fraction.
Harriet?
He echoed, stalling for time. Where the hell was this coming from? The man took a step forward, and Brand felt the air change, a subtle, terrible shift, like the room had suddenly shrunk around him.
Where is she?
Brand didn't know. He really didn't know. Last he saw of Harriet, she was somewhere not here, making his life more complicated. But this guy wasn't looking for a guess. And then, a third question.
What is your connection to Korra?
Brand's blood ran cold. Now that was a name he hadn't expected to hear. His face remained neutral, but his fingers clenched slightly against his restraints. That was a name that wasn't supposed to be on anyone's lips. That was dangerous. The red-eyed man tilted his head slightly, watching, waiting. Brand did what he did best, stall.
Well,
He drawled, forcing himself to grin.
If you're trying to kill the mood, you're doing a great job. Seriously, you should teach a class.
The response came instantly, a fist slamming into his gut, knocking the wind from his lungs. Brand coughed, pain lancing through his ribs. Shit. He barely had time to recover before the man took out a knife. Not for Brand, for himself. The red-eyed man pressed the blade to his own palm and sliced. The cut was deliberate, deep, the dark blood oozing slow as he held up his own bleeding hand, letting Brand watch. Something was wrong. The blood didn't fall normally. It moved strangely, thick and viscous, as though it had a mind of its own. Brand stared, transfixed, stomach twisting. He'd seen a lot of things in his life. He'd seen men die. He'd seen creatures that shouldn't exist. He'd walked the line between the mundane and the deeply unnatural more times than he could count. But this wasn't normal. He swallowed hard.
That's unsettling.
The man lowered his hand, still dripping with that wrong kind of blood.
Talk,
He said calmly. And for the first time, Brand did. Not everything. Just the barest crumbs. The only thing he could afford to give. Damas. That was the only name he was willing to part with. He barely got the word out before the man moved again. The next moment was pure agony. Something cold and sharp slipped under his fingernail, and then, with a sickening tear, the nail was ripped away. Brand's vision flashed white. His breath came out in a ragged, shuddering gasp, his entire body trembling from the pain. The red-eyed man wasn't done. But then, before he could move again, another figure stepped into the room. A woman. She wore a white jacket, her long brown hair neatly tied back, and her presence shifted the entire atmosphere. She was calm, controlled, effortless, and most importantly, she had authority.
Olvid.
She said smoothly, her voice laced with something sharp, something intimate.
I am sorry, lover, but that is all you will get out of him.
Brand barely registered the name. Olvid. The red-eyed elf's shoulders tensed, but he didn't argue. He stood rigid, his jaw tight, his bloodied hand still dripping onto the floor. The woman approached Brand, her expression unreadable as she studied him.
You were found by the body of Damas.
She said, tilting her head slightly.
That makes you of use to me.
Brand exhaled shakily, his vision still swimming with pain.
Oh, good.
He muttered, voice weak but still laced with sarcasm.
I was worried I'd be useless.
The woman's lips twitched, almost a smirk.
You will work for me
She said simply.
and for my mistress in the Tower of Commerce.
Olvid's fingers twitched at his sides, his anger still simmering. But the woman laid a hand on his arm, her touch effortlessly calming him.
After that,
She said lightly.
you can have him back.
Olvid exhaled slowly.
fine.
Brand, still catching his breath, barely managed a weak chuckle.
Sounds fair.
He muttered. Then his head slumped forward and everything went dark.
Chapter 22. A Toast to the Missing.
The broken wing wasn't just being rebuilt, it was becoming something new. The old dive bar, once filled with shadowy corners and whispered deals, was transforming into something better, something that felt stable for the first time in Ang Blackthorn's life. It was his now. The floors, once warped and littered with the scars of too many bar fights, had been replaced with dark polished wood. The ceiling no longer sagged, reinforced with new beams, and the stage was wider, perfect for the live music and performances that would soon fill the nights. A new balcony overlooked the bar, giving it an air of sophistication that it never had before. The place was still a work in progress, with sawdust in the air and the occasional hammering echoing from the back rooms. But the atmosphere was already different. Warmer, livelier, like a fresh start. Aang sat at his usual table, watching the workers shuffle back and forth, fixing up the last of the details. A piano sat in the corner now, waiting for its first player. The bar, sleek and polished, was lined with new bottles, ready to serve more than just the bottom shelf swill it had been known for. Things were looking up, and for the first time in his life, so was he. Claire sat beside him, her presence grounding, the folded weight of her wings brushing his arm as she watched the bar's transformation with subtle amusement. She had a drink in front of her, untouched, but her fingers tapped idly against the glass in rhythm with the soft hum of conversation around them. His future wife. It still felt strange to think about. Him, married, settling down. Hell, if someone had told him a year ago that he'd be engaged to a woman as fierce as Claire, running his own bar, he would have laughed in their face. Yet, here he was.
You're staring,
Claire murmured without looking at him, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Aang huffed a quiet laugh.
Can you blame me?
Not at all.
She said smoothly, taking a sip from her drink. Yeah, life was good, except... His expression darkened as his thoughts drifted. Except Brand wasn't here. And that didn't sit right with him. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling through his nose before finally asking the question that had been nagging at him.
Any word on Brand?
Claire's smirk faded, and she set her glass down, her expression turning serious.
After they took him in for killing Damas, nothing,
She said, shaking her head. Grom, sitting across from them, let out a low chuckle, shaking his head as he took a sip from his own drink.
Killed a Barley's boss.
He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight.
They don't play fair with that kind of thing.
Aang grimaced, gripping his glass a little tighter.
Can't just take a man without a trial.
He muttered.
That's not how this is supposed to work.
Grom barked a laugh.
What? You think they care? A Barley's is dead. That means whoever took Brand owns him now.
The thought made Aang's stomach twist. No, he wasn't letting that happen. Not to Brand. Not before the wedding. Not before he had the chance to sit down with his brother in arms, pour him a drink, and tell him that, against all odds, Aang Blackthorn was about to get married. Because Brand needed to be there. He needed his best friend standing beside him, needed him there to make a scene, to hit on the wrong people, to get outrageously drunk and cause problems on purpose. All the things that made life worth living, and Koga. Hell, he wished the grumpy bastard was still alive. He needed him there too, even if he'd sit in the back corner and pretend not to care. Aang rolled his shoulders, leaning back with a sigh, forcing himself to relax, even though the tension hadn't left his body.
We're going to find him,
He said, his tone final. Grom smirked.
If he's still breathing.
Claire placed a firm hand on Aang's arm, her golden eyes steady.
he wouldn't go down that easy.
She said simply. Aang met her gaze and let himself smile.
No,
He agreed.
he wouldn't.
He lifted his glass, staring at the amber liquid swirling inside, before taking a slow sip. Brand was missing. But Aang wasn't done yet. Grom stood up to stretch, his hulking frame silhouetted against the sunlight cutting through the construction dust.
Still.
He muttered, adjusting the tool belt slung over one shoulder.
If anyone can wriggle their way out of whatever pit they've thrown him in, it's Brand.
Aang stared into his glass a moment longer, then set it down with quiet finality.
Yeah,
He said.
he always finds a way.
Outside, the third corps sun was setting, casting the streets in a warm copper glow. The noise of the city drifted in through the open doorway. Workers yelling across rooftops, street vendors haggling over fruit, a child's laughter echoing down the lane. Life was still moving. Olduvai spun on. Ang stood, the new floor creaking slightly beneath his boots. He looked around the broken wing, breathing it in. His bar, his future. It wasn't perfect. Not yet. But it was real. And soon, he'd be married. He turned to Claire, who was watching him with that calm, patient amusement only she could wear, while still managing to look intimidating. He reached out and took her hand.
Before the wedding,
He said softly.
I'm going to find him. I have to. His family. And I want him there. Hell, I need him there.
Claire squeezed his hand.
Then we'll find him.
She said simply, as though it was already decided. Ang nodded, letting her certainty settle into his bones. He looked out at the sun-soaked street, where workers were laying down the last cobblestones, patching cracks in the foundation, rebuilding.
To the missing,
He murmured.
wherever the hell you are. Hold on. I'm coming?
And with that, the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the city. But inside the broken wing, a warm light remained.
Epilogue, the end of the beginning.
Well, that's one way to open a wound. You've followed the tale of three men, Brand, Ang, and the late Koga. You've watched them lie, steal, betray, and run. And perhaps you've wondered, why follow their story at all? Why shine a spotlight on the chaos they unleashed, the violence they authored, the trust they shattered? Because it mattered. Because they opened the door. You see, Damas Barlays wasn't just planning a clever heist. He didn't just steal from vaults and outsmart guards. No, he dug deeper. He walked the sealed corridors of maximum security, where things not meant for sunlight were locked away and forgotten. And when he left that place, he didn't leave it sealed behind him. What followed was not just a jailbreak, it was a release, a leak in the dam. And now, the monsters are loose. You won't read about it in the Tower of Law's reports. They've scrubbed the records, repainted the halls. But the whispers are there. Something walked out of those halls that night. Many somethings. Some with teeth. Some with spells. Some with names we've tried to forget. Now they move through the veins of Olduvai, through forgotten tunnels, through broken gates, through our dreams. The people can feel it. The parks no longer feel restful. The docks hold fewer ships. And the wind that moves across the upper platforms no longer smells of sunlit steel. It carries mildew and ash. The chaos that began with a handful of criminals now spreads like ink across the sky. And whether Damas planned for this or not, the city is unraveling. But while they ran, while the blood spilled across the white tiles of heaven's loft, and the sewers churned with magic and regret, others were being shaped, quietly, not in shadows, but in firelight, in barracks, in ritual, in purpose. You haven't met them yet, not fully, but you will. A small one, brutal and honest, fighting because someone has to. A quiet one, scaly and strange, driven by curiosity deeper than blood. A clever one, fixing what others break, hoping his ancestors would be proud. And a faithful one, far from his homeland, whispering prayers to a God no one here listens to. They are not vigilantes, not ghosts, not criminals. They are something else, the other road. I will not lie to you. This story is about to get darker. We are beyond the fall of a few criminals now. This is about the city itself, its lies, its pride, its disease, Monsters were unleashed from the lowest levels, but monsters were already here, hiding in offices, in towers, in robes and medals. This is no longer about whether the empire will fall. It's about how far down it has to sink before someone finally pulls the lever. The chaos is rising, the masks are slipping, the walls are cracking, and not everyone will live to see what waits at the bottom. Thank you for walking this far with me, for listening, for remembering. What comes next won't be easy to hear, but it's the part that matters most. Because this story, this sensible hysteria, it's not about one man's greed or one night's blood. It's about the truth. And if you want the truth, you'll have to keep listening. Because the end of the beginning is behind us. And what comes next is the part no one survived to write down.
Skyborn kingdom built on high, but rust and ruin stain the sky. Chains are breaking, ghosts arise, whispers carve through shattered minds. Watch the fall, hear the cries. Truth is lost in Olduvai. Steel doors open, prison burns. Shadows move and tables turn. Jack walks free, his fate unknown. Darkness whispers, seeds are sown. Oswald hunts, but walls collapse. Secrets bleeding through the cracks. Gabriella falling fast. The 055 won't hold, won't last. Golden tongues and silent hands, pulling shreds with weapons rise. Eyes are watching, hearts are claimed. Blood runs deep, but none are named. Lost in shadows, lost in lies, past and future sacrifice. In the dark we hear the call. Olduvai will burn and fall. Olduvai.